Be strong.
Risk control. So we need to manage the risk where we look at additional controls. If numbers go 3 or anything above, then you need to have some additional controls in place so that it doesn't get out of your hands, right? And then we say responsibility or compliance. Who will help you? Because you yourself may not be able to do it. Somebody needs to be even included in the responsibility. And then communication and record keeping. All those things have to be written down. Now, this is a chunky airport. You probably know that, right? We parked along in, I think it's a Terminal 3. Yeah? Now, imagine you're actually flying, right? Usually, I'm sure every one of you have taken a flight, right? Because either you came from your country to here, or if you are Singaporean, you're gone for holidays and things like that, right? Can you imagine the flight is made with what? The plane is made with what? Do you know? Aluminum. Yeah, it's not as good as a steel, right? Aluminum can be easily bent. You know that, right? Because aluminum, it's a soft metal. And how many passengers usually go with a flight? Like a A380, how many passengers? A380 is a double-decker one, right? And how many people can sit in that? Usually 500 or plus. Some actually go up to 600, depends on the seating arrangement. Usually it's like Singaporean airline, maybe 520 or something like that seating. Yeah. So you can imagine the 500 people sitting in this aluminum can. At what height usually they fly? What height usually they fly? Come on, you guys never been to the flight? It's 30,000 or above. Yeah? Why do they fly so high? Do you know? Why do the flight actually go very high up? They can still fly low level, right? They're safe to fly in a low level, but usually they fly very high up. Why?
Good.
Is what? Avoid what?
Things in the air that are low.
No, there is something. I mean, when you take off and landing, you still have to come down, right?
Because the weathers.
What?
The weather in the stratosphere.
It's not weather. Weather can be money. Pressure. Yeah, 30,000 or above. If they don't fly below. Okay, but why is that? There's a purpose. That's why they do it. And they cannot go 60,000, right? They cannot go very high also. Because then there's not enough air. When you go up, the height, the air density decreases, right? The air density at the bottom, closer to a land is much higher. So when you fly in that, it's like, when you have a low density air, the friction is very less. Therefore, the energy you need to spend is much less. Yeah? So higher altitude it flies, more safe, they can save more energy, more fuel. Yeah? So if some newer technology, they can go up to 40,000. Some of the new, like A350 for example, they can fly like 38,000, 40,000, right? So they can manage that. But because of this energy saving concept, that's why they fly all the way up. But can you imagine 500 people in a tin can at 30,000 feet up? In a car, or if something goes wrong, you can stop at near the side of the road and open the door and come out, right? But in the flight you cannot. what you're going to do? If you open the door, you will immediately die because the outside pressure is much lower, right? And then inside. But yet, there are millions of people traveling on a daily basis all over the world, right? So why do the people do it? So if you think about the severity and likelihood, at 30,000 feet, 500 people in the cabin, severity can be very high. If even a small hole will cause problems. Yeah, that's why you're not allowed to carry gun in the flight, right? Because if somebody shoots, it will go through the aluminum very easily. Yeah, even the safety officer are not allowed to carry the gun. Yeah? But then if you multiply severity and likelihood, what kind of number can you get? Can it be 6 or can it be 5? Can it be 4? That's how you look at it. Is this practical? And it's practical. And it's allowed. It's legal, right? Because there are a lot of regulations they have to pass through before they can fly. Yeah. So, and they are not. This is not only for luxury travel, right? It's not like 100 people traveling a day. We have millions of people take flights. Yeah. So that is where you really have to think about how what can happen in the air when you are up there. It can be very severe. If there is a small hole, you will die immediately. We call it implosion, right? Severity, pretty bad. Yeah? And then why are we still taking flights? Likelihood, probably, if something goes wrong, you really have a pretty bad problem in your hand, right? But if you look at the statistics, we don't have so many accidents in the airplane industry, right? Only few happens once in a year, once or twice a year. Yeah, depends on conditions. So in the earlier 1930s, there were some incidents. 2000, it's become lesser and lesser, right? So odds of being involved in a fatal accident, 1 in 5 million kind of thing, right? 1 in something like that. So the number of incidents are very low because of the safety precautions, right? So likelihood will be very small number. Even though severity is higher, likelihood will be, so severity could be 3, but likelihood is 1, right? So 1 times 3 would be still okay. But there is hazards. It's not that we have completely eliminated, right? The things can still go wrong. That's why we have some accidents during this event, right? So identify reasonably practicable measures. So that is also very important. So reasonably practicable measures are the one which airline industry goes through, right? Because they know there are problems, but then as a practical approach, they can be safe to fly because they have all the control measures in place. They go through the strict maintenance of the engines and things like that, etc. Right? Implement the control measures all in place. In fact, each country has its own regulation and they have to follow those things. Based on the risk level, select additional control measures to reduce the risk level, right? So some airlines will have certain restrictions and other airlines, right? So they will use that. Review continually to ensure their effectiveness. So all these measures. So what is reasonably practical? An action is considered to be practicable when it is capable of being done. So it has to be practical to do things. Yeah? We cannot insist that all of you wear the complete suits, go to the chemistry lab, right? It's not practical because it is very inconvenient and we do not need that kind of safety, right? So that's why we only ask you to wear PPEs which are reasonable and practical. That means a lab coat and goggles and the closed shoes, right? So that is very important. We do not ask you to wear the full suit which people wear in the biological, class 4 lab and things like that. Safety, whether it is also reasonable, takes into account safety of injury, harm, if you have, degree of risk involved, and knowledge of hazard and the ways of eliminating and reducing, controlling it, and then availability is equal to the cost of say time. So whatever things you need to analyze the entire process and then make the decision. Yeah. Now you as a consumer, you can say, I don't want to fly. There are a lot of people who don't want to fly. They stay at home, right? Or they take if they're in US, they will drive, right? If you're in other countries also, you can drive from one place to the other. But going international is difficult, right? But now I think they can still drive from one country to the other country. It takes a longer time, that's all. But there are people who don't fly because they are afraid of that. But in general, it's safe to do. Same thing goes for your reactions, right? You have to do reaction. You cannot say all the safety talk is not to prevent you from doing PhD, right? We say you do it safely. That's what's important, right? You can carry out reaction, you can carry out research in a safe manner so that you yourself will not get into trouble or the institution don't get into trouble. Yeah? So that's one of the practical reasons. So we do it in a reasonably practical measures. Yeah. Let's take a 10 minutes break and come back. Yeah? Hello. Let's start. Yeah?
Yes.
Take a seat. Okay. So let's look at acceptability of the risk, right? Because every step we have some risk associated with it. Some are acceptable, some are not acceptable, right? That's why we look at severity and likelihood to get the score. So it is slightly quantitative rather than just approximate, right? So low risk is kind of always acceptable because things can go wrong is minimum. Yeah. So that's what we call it. No additional risk control measures are needed. So you can go ahead and do as it is. Are you guys still discussing something or? You guys done? You guys done? Discussion? Okay. So acceptable means you can still go ahead and do it, right? Its risk is lower, right? So there is no problem with it, no additional measures are needed. But once it comes to medium, then we need to think about some additional risk control, right? Additional controls to be put in place. So for example, careful evaluation of hazard should be carried out, ensure that risk level is reduced, yeah, to as low as possible, yeah. And interim risk control measures such as administrative control may be implemented. Administrative controls are usually policy ones. So for example, you're doing a very flammable reaction, right? So you must be able to take care of some of those things, right? For example, another person should be somewhere nearby when you're doing it. So in case of emergency, he or she can help. Then if it's a fire hazard we are worried about, then the emergency procedure should be reminded or checked, like a fire extinguisher, is it in the right place? Those kind of measures should be there. If it's something else, explosion is something which you suspect, then you need to think about how to protect you from there. So your fume stash should be always down, not to open it too much, etc., right? PPE must be worn all the time, blah, blah. So there are some additional controls we need when it's a risk is medium, right? Or it's a moderately acceptable. That means you must be more aware, more things to be in place before you continue to do the reaction. Yeah? Because something can go wrong. In this case, medium means something can definitely go wrong as compared to the low risk. Yeah? And that's why we need that extra precaution. But high risk, not acceptable. You do not proceed with the reaction unless we do something to bring the risk down to moderate or low. Yeah? Elimination probably the best way to do, or other substitution maybe another one, etc., to reduce the risk. Yeah? So if you get a high risk system, please don't proceed to do the reaction. Okay? So you can see some of those things, again, DNA from extraction. So you see exposure of human, blood-borne pathogens, etc., lab-acquired infection, BVP, and then work in BSL2, etc. So the risk is higher, right? 6 because the severity could be, once it get out, it can really cause damage to the people involved, and the likelihood that can happen is also high. So then you need to have additional controls, or sometimes you stop doing it, right? So better not to do further. You're trying to minimize those kind of risks associated. Then the up to 3 and 2 you can try to do it. Then after the vaccination is taken, those who are handling some of these biological stuff, right? So they have some immunity already there. Those are administrative controls. So anybody who works with the biological stuff, they need to do this injection first before you actually do it, right? So those are administrative control in place. In some cases, for example, body injury, explosion, etc., then we need to have an additional control in place, so proper training and the use of maintenance of centrifuge. So centrifuge can sometimes explode if you are not use it properly, yeah? And the balances are not correct, etc. So things can go wrong. So some person will be in charge of it. The centrifuge, there will be a person. Every instrument should have a in charge personality. So because that person will be using that very everyday kind of thing, and they will take charge of it. So you should let that person to know. Yeah? And then by date means you are going to do one particular date and you finish it off. Yeah? So those things you need to put in the as well in the risk assessment, so that the person who is involved, other than you, yeah, this is not you, this is somebody else in the lab, yeah, and that person should not be always around when you are doing work in the lab. Only for this particular incident, that person should be there. And giving a date means this person is aware of, okay, when are you going to do this reaction? What time are you going to do? So he has a good picture of those things. Yeah? So that's why you need to have a date and name of the person involved. The other things are, proper training, use of maintenance, etc. is an additional measure you need to put in to reduce the risk. Medical risk assessment. So sometimes they will have people make this kind of mistake. What do they say in this column, existing risk control? They will only say wear PPE, wear PPE, wear PPE. That's all they're going to say. Okay, so that is not sufficient. Yeah, so you need to include other control measures too. Like for example, if you are going to do a reaction, you do always inside the fume hood. That's an engineering control, right? And training aspect, what kind of training you receive to do this reaction. So you can mention that in the risk control, existing risk control. Don't always say PPE, wear PPE, wear PPE. That's a minimum. You are required to do it. Okay, that's not a risk control. That is part of risk control, but you need to think about all other things you have available. Yeah? Sometimes, again, this is something auditors definitely pick it up because we see this often in the risk assessment. They just simply talk about PPE, that's all. But that's not sufficient, we know that, right? That's the least one safe ones. Yeah? Refer to SOP. Which SOP? See, this is something where a student have done it before, right? So they say existing risk control is all explained in the SOP. But then they do not say what SOP we are talking about. There is multiple SOPs in every lab, right? SOP is just a standard name, standard operating procedure. So you need to say SOP on this reaction, SOP of this particular equipment, SOP of this particular process, etc. Right? So you need to clearly give then you need to include hazard signage of do not touch with the wet hands and things like that, right? Chamber to be cool before removing sample, refer to control in rows 1 and 2, etc. So you need to be more specific. Don't do general one. Yeah, then it will not work because you have not gone through the details. You are not fully aware of what is written there, etc. Right? So that is need to be reflected in your risk assessment. Refer to SOP, as I mentioned earlier, right? These are things picked up from different risk assessments. Okay. At the end of doing all these things, risk assessments must be kept for at least 3 years. Yeah, legally required, not an option, right? Your risk assessment is a legal document, and it must be kept in the folder for at least 3 years. Yeah? All risk assessment should be properly recorded in the risk assessment form, the Excel form. Yeah? We do not accept anything else. If you submit a Word form, it's not acceptable. It should be that particular Excel format. Yeah? All relevant information must be made available for inspection. So if something goes wrong, or if during auditing term, when the inspector comes and asks you for risk assessment, it's required. You are required to produce that. You cannot say, oh, no, that's a secret document. I don't want to share with you. Right? That doesn't apply. Yeah? Remember, the safety committee has the power to recommend penalties for everybody in the whole campus to the management authority. They don't fire you. They don't give you fine by themselves. They are people who can recommend, make a recommendation of this and that to the relevant authorities. And the relevant authorities guaranteed to listen to them, because for them, the overall safety is very important. They have no personal interest in any of these things, right? So if they recommend something, they will take. For example, if our department safety committee come to your lab and they see a lot of safety problems, they can recommend to a department head, say that, oh, this lab must be closed. The head will take action on it, the guaranteed, yeah, they will close your lab, right? And after, and then they will come up with the guidelines, what need to be done before you can open the lab, right? And then they come back and check whether this has been rectified. Then only they will let you open the lab and do research. So they have that kind of power. Therefore, you must listen and do that. Keep record for at least 3 years. And how about obsolete risk assessment? What will you do after 3 years? You can throw them out because it's not relevant anymore. But if you are still in the lab, you need to redo those risk assessments. Yeah? Or you can actually get the same assessment if you're still doing that reaction. You can keep those records, but change the date. Yeah? It should not look like you have done 3 years ago. Yeah? Date and get a signature from supervisor. That become a new risk assessment for it. Yeah? So remember that many students don't do this. And that is what auditors usually pick up and give us a trouble. Yeah? Still keeps as record for at least 3 years, right? So record keeping, members of the risk assessment team, records should be concise and include the following information, right? So who did the risk assessment must be there. Your name should be there, right? In NUS, we don't work in a team, so usually we are looking for who did that, the student name, right? And the process or procedures and tasks, all the activities, did you fill all the column properly? Hazard identification, possible accident, you remember the different columns, so they have to be filled. Existing risk control, risk level of each hazard, recommendation on additional risk control measures, persons responsible to implement these additional measures. If you put in there, so let's say you have 5 score in the the risk, then you have to have an additional measure, and you must have a name of the person who can actually monitor that for you. Yeah, you cannot just leave that column. Signature, date, and designation of person conducting this assessment. You should sign with the date, and you're also it has to be endorsed by your PI or professor. Yeah, you need to get a signature from them as well. Otherwise, it's not valid because you can modify any time, right? But once you put a date there, then that becomes valid from that date onwards. Implementation, ensure the risk assessment should be approved by, endorsed by PI. So they should know. Your professor should sign it, and not only it has a validity, right? You cannot say, oh, I have done, I give it to safety lead. No, that is not valid, right? Safety lead probably will do something else. You must make sure that it's actually processed and signed by the PI. The PI should implement recommended risk control measures without undue delay, right? So if you submit a PI and then if he is too busy, did not get back to you, please go and ask again, right? Get that signature and pass it to the safety, right? Because that has to be kept there. implement the risk controls by applying alert as low as reasonably practical. Remember, concept and hierarchy control, because sometimes we may not have all the options available for us. So as long as it is reasonably practical to do, we can go ahead and do it. Yeah. Train the affected staff student on the risk assessment findings, etc., and the control to minimize the risk. So all these things have to be in place. Establish an implementation schedule to ensure that risk control measures are implemented. So if you have an additional control, you must have that timeline and then some actions to be taken. Yeah. And this RA should not be only in paper form. It should reflect on your actions as well, right? If you do wonderful RA and then go to the lab and you forget about all the things what you did and get into trouble, again, you're a little bit safer because you have the document you did it, but still you are responsible for your own actions. Yeah? Make sure you follow those. At least once in every 3 years you review it, or if some accident happened in your lab, you must go and review all your RAs, yeah, related to that accident. After any accident or serious incident occurs, again, go and modify it. Yeah? When there are changes in the laboratory, so for example, if you are shifting from S5 to S9, you should change because the location is changed, your layout is changed. Yeah? Your fume would probably change, etc., etc. So all those kind of things you need to redo the RA. Review after accident or serious incident, right? Other indicators are MC given by doctor. So as I mentioned earlier, if somebody got injured and if you only got 1 or 2 days MC, it is considered light incident. If he gets 3 days or 4 days or something, it is considered serious incident. So 3 and above, I think the university has to report to the university has to report to Ministry of Manpower and the doctor has to report to Ministry of Manpower. Now, how does OSHI know there was an MC given to the student? OSHI is the one who communicates with the MOM. We do not communicate. Department don't send anything out, right? But how does OSHI know that there was an incident in chemistry? This student got an MC for 4 days. OSHI is somewhere on the other side of the campus, right? They would not know what happened in the chemistry department. But then how do they know that information? You guys are not connecting anything, right? We discussed this earlier. How do OSHI know something went wrong in chemistry?
Incident? There is incident?
Which one?
If there is incident?
Yeah. How does OSHI know? If there is an incident in the chemistry department, like S9, right?
Yeah.
How do OSHI get to know? Or somebody went, after the incident, somebody went to NUS and got an MC for 4 days. How does OSHI know?
From the emergency police.
Police is not going to talk to OSHI. Why should the police talk to OSHI? They will, every department only do their job, right? They don't need to do additional calling and talking to. Definitely OSHI should not know from the Straight Times, right? Or TV. That's not the route they should get the information. But there is another route we must inform OSHI. How? After the incident, you must go online and report your incident, right? Remember, we talked about this earlier, right? So there is a platform where you need to, next class I will show you what that platform is, right? You need to report online within 24 hours before you clean up anything, right? You need to report. And then that is what OSHI actually look through, okay? And then OSHI will come and investigate. They will send the people over, faculty send the people over, and they have access to these things, yeah? And then they investigate the cause and what happened, etc. And during that investigation, they will find out, did anybody go to hospital, which doctor treated, what is the, the recommendation, etc., etc. So they will get. Now, the funny thing is that we had a few cases where we had incidents in the department, and the professor asked the student to go to UHC, right, and to report, to get it checked whether anything, right. But the student totally forgot to report. then OSHI got to know this. How does OSHI get to know? If the student is not reporting, OSHI can still get to know. What happens? So there are additional controls because Singapore people are smart, right? Even the ministry is very smart people sitting there, right? They know what can go wrong, and they will put things in place that these things cannot, left it by chance or by option. So in that scenario, the Ministry of Manpower called OSHI and shouted them, right, saying that how come this is not reported? How come you guys did not give us a report on that particular incident? So what happened in that scenario is that student went and saw a doctor in UHC, and the doctor in UHC has to report these kind of incidents. Yeah, they are also asked to go online and report because that is a work-related incident, right? So same thing applies to NUH. If you go there, they will ask you, how did it happen? The moment you say it happened in our lab or during your work, then they have to report to the ministry, right? A different level of seriousness, right? As I said, if it's just a minor thing, they probably don't take it that seriously. If it's 3 days MC or above, they have to go online and report to the ministry, right? So it can so happen that UHC doctor reports ministry, but OSHI did nothing. That happened in a couple of cases, right? Because OSHI has no information. The student did not go online and report this incident, right? So the MOM gets a doctor's report, but not from OSHI's report. So they call the president and say, hey, look, this is not working, right? So there must be some way to fix this. So that's why they get into, the student will get into trouble, the group will get into trouble, right? The professor will get into trouble because they are not trained to do it. So please do this very carefully. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why you must go online and report. Otherwise you will have a problem. Number of days MC, extended property damage. That's another big thing, right? If something really goes wrong, your humid is destroyed, you cannot do reaction anymore. Then the department has to come in and fix it, right? Somebody has to pay for it as well. We do not, the department is not asking you to pay for it, right? It is they have some money to fix those infrastructure. So please pay attention to those. Extent of environmental protection. So again, a lot of these things come into play when there is an incident. Review and revise the risk assessment when new equipment, materials and chemicals are used, right? Obviously your process has changed. Parameters have changed. So if you are using high temperature, then again you have to redo it. Change in the equipment setting, change the concentration, volume, chemicals, etc., temperature, pressure. New or revised process, procedures, working in practices. You change because the last reaction did not work. So you actually going to do a new method or new procedure. Again, you need to do a new risk assessment. New persons joining your lab or change of competency. That means any time a new staff or new student come in, they all have to do the same risk assessment, right? You don't just take your risk assessment and give it to them. You ask them to do that, go through it, etc. Right? Of course, you can help them. It's not done in a vacuum, right? Always you can help those person to do it. Make sure that person is aware of what he or she is doing. Yeah? Don't just give them your risk assessment and say, oh, don't worry about it. Just put your name at the bottom and then submit. And that is actually bad because that person will not understand what is risk assessment for, right? Additional risk control measures are introduced and risk control measures are changed or revised, and then also you need to do the risk assessment. Communication, of course there should be a perfect communication between you and your supervisor and the department safety committee, etc., right? So it should not be a breakdown of it. So nature of the risk involved, nature of the implementer, etc., you should be communicated, discussed. Risk assessment is reviewed, or when there is a significant change in the work practices and procedure, again fill up the new form, give it to supervisor for it to sign, right? He has to go through it and sign it. So risk management and success factors, select suitable risk assessment team or assessment process, risk treatment, communication, all these are actually involved in the proper successful risk assessment and risk management. Right? right? Training, integrate into existing process, technology support, record keeping. So it is never done in a vacuum or never done in something only one individual is involved. It's a whole setup is involved, right? Because control measures are already in place in your lab. So you need to incorporate those measures into your risk assessment tool. Benefits of effective risk management, safer laboratory. All of you, the way you came in, you can graduate with the same. Maybe you put on a little bit weight, that's all you're going to have, right? No other loss of hands or loss of fingers, loss of whatnot should not happen, yeah? So that's very important for us. Effective and efficient research, but your focus should be more getting the research done and graduating than anything else, right? Quality working environment, so you should not be getting sick just because you come to the lab and do your research, right? So the environment should be clean and happy working environment. Highly motivated staff and students, right? But this is just a risk assessment, okay? It has nothing to do with your project. Sometimes, project can be very tough. You do a reaction over and over again, you change many things, still doesn't work. That is a different category altogether, right? And whom should you approach? Not the safety committee, right? Whom should you talk to in that case? Where your project is not making any progress? Of course, your professor, right? Supervisor, and ask him to change the project or something to make it happen, or get some suggestion from him and solve your problem, right? Safety committee has nothing to do with it, right? So you don't come and say, oh, my reaction is not working because I did all this risk assessment, etc. Safety committee will say, oh, no, sorry, we do not know anything about your reaction. We only look at the risk associated with hazard involved, right? Not to do with any chemistry, your PhD program. Your PhD program is not the business of safety committee, right? It is actually you and your supervisor have to deal with it. Okay, so please take care of it. On the other hand, if you are really stressed from the PhD, safety committee can come in a separate way, right? For example, your odd behavior in the lab, yeah, and if the supervisor say, oh, this student has been doing these kind of funny stuff, and if you report you to the safety committee can actually come ask you to for a meeting and then discuss the problem associated. Then they will probably involve, because then it compromises secure not only you, but other people in the group as well, right? So again, remember, where do you go if you are under stress? Not go home, right? Right?
Yeah.
Where do you go?
It's stop counseling.
Yeah, we call the counseling as a department, right? We have a counseling office near the UHC. I think it's still there. The UHC is one side, and adjacent to that, on the left side, I think there is a door where you can go. But make an appointment first before you go, because these guys are usually very busy. Yeah, I don't know whether they have a walk-in counter or not. They may have. But in any case, there is number given in the. Remember, I gave you a bunch of numbers, right? That slide has a counseling number as well. Or you can go to the NUS and search counseling department, then they give you the number, right? Call them. And there is also 24-hour counseling service as well. Yeah. But this is actually for you to use. Nothing, if you are stressed, please make use of it. Don't suffer alone, yeah, because that's not worth it. You can always use those things. Yeah, now, if you go to risk assessment is done all the time, even without you knowing, you are actually doing risk assessment. So this is slide about buying a pet. When you go to pet shop, what are you going to look for? You have to make a risk assessment in your own head, right? So if you are going to buy a pet, would you buy a crocodile or you buy a bird? You make your own risk assessment, right? If you want to be eaten by crocodile, then you buy a crocodile, right? As a pet. So you have to identify hazard. If you are looking at the pet, you can identify what kind of danger is associated with this pet, yeah? And make your own assessment. And then you say elimination. Is it possible to eliminate the risk associated? Sometimes if you are going to buy a dog, the dog may be very vicious, very highly energetic, or barking all the time, etc., etc. Then you can change instead of that dog to another dog. That's one option you have. Or you can change it to say, oh no, we don't want to buy a dog. Let's buy a cat, right? It's your choice. So you eliminate that risk rather than just sticking with the same thing, right? And then comes the control measures, right? Risk control, engineering control, administrative control, PPE, all those things can be implemented, right? You can think about what do you have at home? Do you have a cage for this pet? Do you have other administrative control in place, right? All those things you need to evaluate. If you do not evaluate, what will happen? You will suffer with that kind of consequence, right? You can have accidents and incidents in your thing. So it is up to you to do that evaluation. So OSHI has a lot of training assessment. I think some of you probably already done online modules and things like that. And they will also offer in-person training as well. So do that. Yeah? I think our safety committee do take attendance, and occasionally they will send email to the supervisor and say, oh, this student did not attend, please ask that student to attend the training, right? So do attend and get the attendance. And sometimes, I know you guys are super smart, right? You go in the training and you take the attendance and disappear through the back door, right? They also monitor that. They will actually say, oh, this student left so well. So, and then, not only you are smart, but your safety committee can also be very smart because they have experience in handling those, right? So do attend and don't leave so early. Yeah? Go through those. And you can get more information from that's the last part of this one. So let me, okay. As I mentioned earlier, many of our activities are governed by the laws of that particular country, right? So if as a student you have to follow certain things, as a faculty I have to follow certain things, etc. And this is actually getting more and more serious because they actually, something goes wrong, they will ask us all kinds of questions. Yeah. In fact, NUS had a few of those incidents in the past. Every organization has that kind of incident, right? So then that's when all these legal issues crop up. Yeah. Give an example. Let's say I do something in our lab, or my students does something in lab, and then the NUS do a unfair treatment or something. I don't know. I am very unhappy with NUS. If I call the the news and say, oh, this is what incident happened, and blah blah blah. Then if it comes in the news, then NUS can actually sue me or take action against me, right? Because I am not following the required protocol. So there are lots of protocols and regulations set up by the institution, set up by the country's government, and etc. etc. So Singapore is a city-state, right? So there is only one authority which makes those rules. But if you go to larger countries like China or India or US, they have regional rules as well, state rules versus the federal rules, etc. So we have to follow many of those things. But again, none of you usually break the rules, right? Because we are aware of common, and safety is a common sense, right? Therefore, as long as you follow the norm in your lab, then you're not breaking any rules per se, right? And that's something which I need to highlight in this one, right? Who follow these rules very carefully? OSHI. OSHI actually has to implement protocols, yeah? Because they will liaise with the ministry and they will liaise with the departments, yeah? And therefore, if the ministry has something, new policy comes up, laws comes up, they will tell the head of the department, okay, you have to follow this because it's a new guidelines and new this thing. So a lot of time, a lot of communication comes through that, okay? So OSHI has a website where all this information about the laws and everything you can get from there. So use this website. Be aware of the legislation governing your activities. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. You cannot go to a court and say, I did not know, or I am not aware of that. Right? That doesn't usually apply. Legal principle holding that a person who is unaware of the law may not escape liability. Yeah? You still are liable for your own action. So the Workplace Safety and Health Act, it's a huge document. It's not 1 page or 2 page document, right? The laws, when it's written, it's thousands of pages because it covers every aspect of it, right? So if you are really interested, you can download this through OSHI website. OSHI has a certain website and it gives you a list of laws applicable to NUS in general, not chemistry, but NUS in general. So you can actually get those things. And this is written by who? Who writes these kind of laws? Not minister, right? Who writes these laws? Not OSHI definitely, right? This is a state country law. Who writes those things? What's the process involved? Who? Yeah, Ministry of Manpower, but it's a building, right? But who actually writes? It's like who does research in the chemistry department, not Department of Chemistry, right? It's the students who does it, right? So there is what every Ministry of Manpower, Ministry of Law, Ministry of Home Affairs, they all have lawyers in, there is a team look at these kind of regulations which you need, okay? And it's not a one-day affair. They will not make a rules or regulation in 1 day sitting down and have a meeting and say, tomorrow we'll change this. Absolutely not, right? Because it will affect many people, many things, and they have to be very careful when they develop. So these are written by legal people, right? Lawyers. What kind of language lawyers speak? Not our language, right? I don't know whether you have seen lawyers like this. They're kind of different English altogether. Trying to figure out what they are saying is always difficult, right? So these kind of documents are pretty hard to understand. So unless you are not getting sleep, if you have a sleeping problem, download one of these and start reading. You will definitely go to sleep, right? So that kind of, but it's good to know that the sources is available if you want to have a look. Yeah? So you can see the PDF version of it. And these are not 1 page or 2 pages, they're a huge document. And these are a bunch of list of things, laws governing, developed by the Singapore government, right? Applicable to NUS, that's what they put it there. And it's available from OSHI website. I give you the web address, right? So some of you probably want to read it and see whether what it says. Yeah. Safety and Health Legislation Framework. Workplace Safety Health Act, key subsidiary legislation under this one, right? Key legislation related to the chemical management. Okay, so this is a whole process how they develop. I don't know whether it's important for us. Usually the law will start. When does the process start? When they start thinking about the law. How does the ministry knows that there is something missing? Remember, we just had, what was the latest one we had? The personal data protection thing. Why they came up with that?
Accident.
Personal data protection, there was no accident, but there was a problem. What was the problem?
Scam. Scam.
A scam is different. That's a financial thing, right? Personal data protection is something I cannot disclose all your email to somebody else. All your phone number to somebody else. Yeah, so there was, okay, when the law was, now there is a law, right? In Singapore, you cannot tell other people what is the phone number of so-and-so, right? For example, Singtel, who is the company, telephone company, cannot sell all the database to another marketing agent and say, oh, here is the phone number of all the people. They cannot do that. That's totally illegal in Singapore. Yeah? How does it, why do they make that law? And the other thing, I think it's something about internet. So you cannot go to internet and say, write a lot of information about other people. Yeah? That's also under personal data sheet. You cannot blame somebody else. You cannot write, say, I don't like you, therefore I create a story for you, right? False information. Misinformation, false information. That has been very popular in recent years. So in order to prevent that, government actually worked on it and then came up with this. So that at least in Singapore, you cannot go and blame so-and-so, right? If you write I don't know. Maybe after I read your project report, I will see some people will say, this is totally waste of time. We spent 3 weeks in learning about safety. Right? Absolutely. I am not going to sue you, right? But it's okay. You can say that. But that's not the way it should be done, right? You need to understand what's the purpose, why you do it, etc., right? Because in the digital world, recent times, right? You can go to TikTok, or you can go to what is the other one, FB. You can say whatever you want, and that causes a lot of trouble, especially if it is related to the government policies. So there were a few cases in Singapore. I don't want to go through individual cases, but that created a lot of problems for the concerned authorities, right? If somebody go and say tomorrow that this particular thing is, this ministry is doing this and that ministry is doing that, they will have to investigate because it came from society, right? So what they do is that in case if there is an accident, there is such an issue in the society as a whole, they will start thinking about how do we come up with, right? The problem they will identify, and then they read and debate and and then asked by the president, somebody has to write it up and then debate that in the parliament, and then make modification. Because in the parliament, they actually, when they discuss it, it is written by a ministry, but covers everything. Then they will ask our other people to comment. Yeah? Is there anything practical? Did we miss anything? Or is it too harsh? Or is it too low? It's a whole long process. A law cannot be made in one day or 1 week or 1 month even. It takes sometime 1 year. I mean, Singapore is much faster than other countries, but it takes a few months to a year to pass, right? So parliaments usually do that, and eventually the president has to sign to make it law. All the laws are done, including our safety laws, are done through this channel only. Yeah, there is no exception. That's another thing you need to know. The country's president cannot wake up to one day and say everybody should wear this kind of thing, or people should do this. No, he cannot decide anything, right? It has to go through the parliament, discussion, etc., etc. So that's a common process we do. So usually they call the act, right? Act of Parliament, and then you can have many subsidiary legislation. So the act is the common imperative, right? And then you can have more regulation, rules, orders, and under that notification, etc. Under that umbrella of an act. Workplace Safety Act is the one which started, and then you can have subsidiary regulation under. The ministers and authorities and subsidiary registration putting an act into practice. So why do we need all these kind of things? Because they are going to deal with many institutions. For example, even safety rules are, for institution like NUS is different from company, industry, right? Because we deal with a different aspect. For example, all of you guys are here on a scholarship, government scholarship, right? So you have a certain different protection than a regular employees, yeah, and then regular employees who go 9 to 5, they have certain strict, this thing. For example, they may close the whole institution by 6 o'clock. You cannot go after 6 to your lab, etc. But in NUS, you can work 6 o'clock. Nobody is going to close the door in NUS, right? So that these are all some exceptions given by these kind of subsidiaries. So this particular institution, this applies. The other particular institution, this applies. This group of people, this applies. And the other group, that applies, right? So everything has to be clarified, because you cannot take one stick and say this applies to across, right? And that makes a lot of practical issues, practical problems. And that are all taken into consideration when they design that. Okay? So safety and health legislation framework involves all these things, right? Starting from Workplace Safety Health Act and the Risk Management Regulation, Fire Safety Act. Then we have this laboratories and workplace concerning general provisions, Petroleum Flammable Act, Environmental, Arms and Explosives Act. All these things applicable to our NUS as well, because we deal with all the different agents, different sections. Yeah? The Arms and Explosive Act is not the same as the Flammable Act, because the different agencies will be looking after that. Police, for example, looking at the Arms and Explosive Act. The fire department will be looking at the flammable thing. Environmental protection is looked up by another agency, NEA, for example, right? So these are subsidiary regulation which is specified to one issue of that under the same act. Okay, so it all started in up to 1973. It is not called Workplace Safety and Health Act. It is called Factories Act. Why Factories Act? Because that's the time where a lot of factories were working, and they only looked at that particular group of people. They did not look at a educational institution. They did not look at a research institute, etc. It didn't. Even research institute probably did not exist at that time, right? And that is have a different problems and different environment than the industries or factories which produce products. Yeah. So the up to 1973, this is only covered by them. And then from 1973 to 2006, they started including other institutions in Singapore. Yeah, construction industries, education institutions, research institutes, etc., etc. Because it takes some time for them to implement and bring this group of people under that act, right? So 2006, the name changed to incorporate all the people working in Singapore, including our people work from home, right? Some people now do freelancing, right? And they are also covered under this, okay? But they are different from people working under the industry, right? But they have certain rules which to protect them. Like CPF, etc. Even freelancers have to contribute to the CPF. You cannot say, oh, no, I am not working for anybody, therefore I don't need to do this, etc. Many such issues related to that has to be incorporated into this. And there is also a lot of accidents at that time. See, for example, 2004 again was a bad year. Remember I showed you 2012 for NUS was a bad year. We had many major incidents. 2004 was bad in Singapore, right? Maybe there is something to do with I don't know, Chinese calendar. So I don't know. So 2004 there was a highway collapse, Nicole highway collapse, right? That was a major. It's not happened on every year. It only happened once in a while, right? But that was a major incident. We had a couple of fatalities there. Yeah? Nicole Highway, where is it? It's near the Suntec City, that area, right? Collapse of Fusionopolis. You know where Fusionopolis, right? There was a building collapse there in 2004. Fusionopolis is just across. The Biopolis and Fusionopolis, Hutchison Beach. Fire at Keppel Shipyard is another one happened, right? And then one Raffles construction site fell down. And NUS had one incident where, this big, what is that called, crane fell down, right? And then during the business, they were building the business building, business administration building. So there was a fatality there. So a lot of things can, go wrong in the different places. And they have to be bringing the same under this kind of act. Otherwise, if we have to build make a law for each institution, it's going to be a nightmare, right? So they want to bring all these things into one place. So you can see the different type of Nicole Highway collapse. There were 4 people died. Fusionopolis 2, and then shipyard fire actually more people, right? Something like 7 people, and then this one is Raffles Square one, right? 2 people died. So even the numbers may be small, but concerning Singapore, such a small state, even one death is actually too huge. Yeah, we should not have that kind of accidents and problems. So there has to be some change. Safety has to be brought on the front, and then reduce the risk at source by requiring all stakeholders to eliminate and minimize the risk they create. So because remember the cradle to grave kind of things, we talked about waste thing, right? So same here, how do we end up this one? Because somebody is doing something, right? And that has to be done in a safer way so that everybody is protected, not only the people involved in this, but also people near to it, people users that facility, etc., right? So a lot of those things has to be done in a safer manner, so everybody is protected, right? Principle to prevent accident through higher penalties for poor safety and health management. So if you tell somebody, oh, do it safely, like we are telling you, right? Go to a lab and do risk assessment, etc. But some of you will not even listen. Some of you probably watching YouTubes and whatever movies or reading newspaper. They don't listen. But tomorrow they will go to the lab and create an accident. What can we do? We don't just sit quiet and say, oh, that's his problem. He got injured because it's due to his action. And we don't do that. We actually go and investigate what happened in that case. If any one of you do something intentionally or without knowledge, without this thing, you will be punished. There are various ways to take that into consideration, right? So that's what it's principle to prevent such accidents through higher penalties. So they will impose penalties to the organization or people in charge, etc. And so if we don't do it, many accidents will keep happening. So what? Nothing going to happen. I don't have to follow this. I don't have to follow that, right? So therefore, government will put penalty into it to prevent other people to follow, not to repeat the same mistake, but follow the regulations. Greater industry ownership to the workplace safety and health outcomes. So industries by itself should take pride in saying that, okay, our workplace is very safe. Now I don't know whether if you go somewhere in Singapore, like there is a building and construction, they will say outside, so many days without any accident, so many days, we have zero accidents, zero emergencies, etc. That they actually take pride in that. They are doing safe work at the construction site, at their particular institution, right? So that is where, you really educate people to do things in a safer manner, yeah? And this is important for a government who actually look after the entire society, entire people. They are not making distinction between chemical industry versus, other industries, right? They are looking at global, see what can go wrong, how to prevent. So it places responsibility of workplace safety on all stakeholders along along lines of control at the workplace, right? They don't actually leave, they don't say, oh, you're students, so you're just learning process, so you can do whatever you want. No, they don't say that. You're students and you're taught something and you must follow those kind of guidelines. And that is not the same for a faculty. Professors are much more responsible, right? So they have different rules and regulations, yeah? And then that goes to a head and dean, there is a different criteria altogether. They have to be even more responsible, yeah? Then it focuses on WSH systems and outcomes rather than merely on compliance. Compliance means, okay, I am aware of it, so I will do minimum to meet the requirement. That's not enough. They actually focuses on more how do you respond to these kind of things, and is it actually you're doing something about it, or you just meet the compliances. So they can actually, there are various parameters to check on these kind of stuff, right? They do that. And then it facilitates effective enforcement through issuance of remedial orders. So if there is something happens, they will come up with different criteria to monitor why it happened, how it happened, etc., right? And they monitor the performance for a certain period to see did they improve or are they still in the same boat as earlier, right? And that's this kind of, they have manpower to do that, they will have mechanism to do that. and it imposed higher penalties for non-compliance and risky behavior. So if after it fails from all these three, it can actually charge institutions, right? So for example, let's say in chemistry, touch wood, nothing happened, but there are accidents every month, yeah, and then the ministry will come and say, ask questions, and because OSHI has to submit reports on every major incident, right? So if it is keep on going for 6 months, the ministry will be very upset. Yeah, ministry will say, why is it happening? What is your action to prevent this happening from next? If university just keep quiet and do nothing, then the ministry will come up with a fine. So they can fine huge amount, 500,000, million, depending on the issue, right? How serious the violation is. And the first time violation versus second time violation versus third time, the fine will go up. I will explain to you what that means. I think there is number somewhere. So there is a provision to impose penalties, yeah? And that's the way they can enforce this law. If there is no penalties, people just ignore. There are many countries it happens. I came from India. The enforcement is very poor, right? So many people do the thing and they get away with it, right? In Singapore, nothing of that sort happens. Yeah? If you do something, there's always a camera watching. You can't even say, I did not do it, right? They will come with evidence and say, oh, you were there, we can identify you, right? So therefore, you can not run away from it. So there are a lot of people involved also. That's also another important thing. You are not working alone. Yeah? You work in a lab, which is supposedly your professor is in charge. That lab is under the department, so the department head is in charge of the whole department. And then the department is under deanery. The dean will be responsible for it. And the faculty is under university. So university is responsible. So it's not just one person. Even when you make a mistake, the ministry don't come and ask you what you did, right? Ministry, where does it go? The people will ask you, the ministry people will ask the president what happened. And then the president will not have an answer for it, right? What is he going to do? He will ask the provost, right? He is below in the management system, right? Provost will ask who? The dean. The dean will ask the head. Head will ask the professor. Professor will ask the reply. And even sometimes professor is on traveling, conference trip, etc. He won't know. Then he has to come and ask you directly, right? So that is what I'm saying. So it's a chain of people involved. So it's not going to be a simple issue to handle. And every one of these people in the chain has a different role to play, responsibility to play. They cannot say, I don't know anything about it, I'm sitting somewhere on the campus. We cannot do that. Same goes for in industry. The CEO has to take the full responsibility of the industry, right? The CEO cannot say, oh, I don't know what this division is doing. I don't know what this production lab is doing, etc. They cannot say that. They have to take the full responsibility. We see this all the time, right? We see CEOs are responding to certain crises in the industry at the time. Okay, so principals are professors, employers, occupiers, manufacturers, owners, self-employed persons. All these people are involved. A person at work is like you, or somebody who actually do the work. The other people are all kind of managing the thing, right? Everybody is responsible, right? So they will have some role to play in this. So this is employers is a reasonable practice measures to ensure safety and health. So if you are a resident of the university, you have to have infrastructure to do things in a reasonably practical measures. That means it doesn't have to be ideal. Yeah, you cannot say everybody is working only in individual rooms and things like that. That may be ideal situation, but that is not practical, right? So therefore, it is okay to have a reasonably practical environment. His employees at work and persons not being his employee who may be affected by any undertaking carried out on by him in the workplace. So sometimes you are working in a society, right? So that's what I was talking about earlier, right? If you have a lot of exhaust fumes coming up and people are getting sick at the NUS and neighboring buildings, we are still responsible. Yeah, as long as we don't do it safely, they can make a penalty for us. Right? So the principles to take reasonably practical measures to ensure safety and health of any contractor engaged in any direct or indirect subcontractor. So this principal could be your professor or head of the department, right? This could be your president or provost, yeah, who actually provide the facilities and construct, right? So different levels, and they have different responsibilities as well. So contractor means, as I mentioned earlier, right? If you have an instrument in your lab, if somebody comes to fix that, the professor is in need to provide the PPEs and other things. Yeah? If something goes wrong, that professor will be in trouble. But if you are bringing somebody into the lab, you are responsible for that person's safety, right? For example, you cannot say, oh yeah, that instrument is, I don't use that instrument, but you let that person come in. You are the one reported this into, liaise with the company. Then you need to take care of that, right? You need to provide PPE, etc. And you also don't leave him alone and then go for lunch, right? If something happens in your absence, you'll still be liable for those. Yeah. So those are things we continue this next class tomorrow, right? But remember, these laws and regulations are quite important. So I think it's good to go through that quickly and learn a little bit about the book. So don't go in. Let me take an attendance and then we can go. Angel food? Angel food. Okay, listen. Let's do that quick attendance. If you listen to me, then we finish in a few minutes, right?
All right.
Angel food? Angel is not here. So, Bao Hanya, Bao Hayoshi, and Kai In, Chen Song, Chen Suyang, Chen Siku, Chen Sichuan, Clement Om Yuki, Dan Jiang, Dan Jiang, Fan Wei, Fu Sihan, Gao Yili, Han San Hui, He Hao Xian, Ho Chuan Yen, Hu Haibo, Hu Haibo, Hu Jin Hao, Ibrahim, Ji Chen Rui, Jian Si Jian Jiao Si Hao, Jim Jiamin Tani, Tani is not here. Kimberly Su Yuya, Quan Ho, Gustamo, Li Bing Da, Li Ruini, Li Shuahai, Li Songmi, Li Wansi, Lu Dihan, Liu Guantong, Liu Liang, Liu Mingji, Liu Yifai, Liu Xingwei, Liu Yuji, Ma Xiang Yun, Ng Junwei, Pearl Chan Xiuqi, Pearl, Chu Liwen, absent yesterday also. Chu Liwen. Sean Carey Vinoto, Shen Kexi, Su Xuan Yi, Tang Yu, Tang Se Sen Yan, Tang Sen Yan, Wu Huang, Wang Hansen, Wang Huya, Wang Chi Jian, Wang Shizhen, Wu Jia Xuan, Xu Wei Han, Yep Liang Wei Benjamin, Zhang Hao Yu, Zhang Ting Yao, Zhang Wei, Zhang Yijun, Zhang Zheng Yuan, Zhang Si Hao, Zhao Bishan, Zhao Juni, Zhao Yiran, Zhao Yufei, Zhao Jun, okay, Zhu Yupen, Pan Shao. I hope nobody actually did 2 attendance, right? For your friend, it's okay. So those who are absent, you can only have 1 absent, and this is the easiest one where you get into trouble, right? Where if you miss the attendance, you will fail. Yeah, because it's a core module, so you should attend lectures. And I can see some people come only at the second after the interval and those kind of stuff. But it's okay. At least you show up, then you get an attendance, right? If you don't get an attendance, you can, there is no other way I can make sure you guys are here, right? And it's important to do that. So there are a couple of people already missed more than 1. Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow.